Hello, beautiful people. Hope you're good. Enjoy this evening because it's going to be a really, really great one. I've been looking forward to it since I managed to get Wayne on from Eerie Edinburgh, and I have been meaning to do some Scottish ghost stories and tales of haunted Scotland, and certainly from Edinburgh for a while because we always talk about English locations and UFOs and bits of pieces, but not so much around Scotland. So really looking forward to this evening. Anybody who follows Eerie Edinburgh, I'm quite sure you'll be enjoying it as well. And because they've got a huge following, and quite rightly so, because they are superb at what they do. So let's welcome him in. Let's put a face to a name. Good evening, Wayne.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
No, exactly. I think with some people, obviously, there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, I just love your voice," but obviously, you don't really kind of show much of yourself kind of on camera and things in producing these videos that you do.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. I'd much rather just do the narration rather than show myself. I think it's just because it's about the stories, not about me, really.
Yeah.
And I just the personal opinion is that I feel if I was on camera, it would take away more from the stories. So that's why I choose for the narration over anything else.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I kind of understand that because people can just fully kind of envelop themselves in the story and the characters in the story and things like that. But no, it's not that type of podcast. So do you want to say obviously a little bit about yourself before? Because obviously, if nobody has followed Eerie Edinburgh yet, do you want to say a little bit about your channel and the kind of stuff you've done and have done and how long you've been going?
Yeah, so it started in lockdown when everybody was making banana bread. I'm not that good a cook, so I started to collect ghost stories. I've always loved ghost stories. Ever since I can remember. I remember my mum telling me, I'm one of these people that doesn't watch scary films. It's too much, but I'll go to Wikipedia and read the plot. And when I was a kid, my mum was my Wikipedia. She would tell me about what happened with Rosemary's Baby and Salem's Lot and things. And she was a very good storyteller. I don't think she recognised it, but the way that she told it, I can remember the chills down my spine. So the story aspect of a ghost story has always been something that I've loved. And over the years, collecting books and things, I noticed that there was a trend where there were certain areas or certain locations that the focus was on in Edinburgh, even though we have this reputation as the City of the Dead and the most haunted place in the UK. Well, that's up for debate. I saw that you had somebody who claimed to have York as
the York one.
Yeah, we should get both of us on and we'll duke it out over which place is the most haunted.
I think you should.
Yeah, but the vaults and Greyfriars and Mary King's Close became the focus for all the stories. You go on YouTube, and these are the stories that came up. And having, living in Edinburgh all my life, I knew that there's so many more tales that could be told, and we were losing these stories. So I thought this is a good way to help keep these tales alive. And I started to follow another storyteller called John Tantallon from North Edinburgh Nightmares, who focused on Leith, and I kind of thought I could help do what he's doing, but on a wider scale across Edinburgh. So I started a website in 2022, in the summer of 2022. And as you mentioned, people have told me in the past that I've got quite a nice, soothing, calm voice. And there was a lot of people who were suggesting that maybe I do a podcast to go with it. And then I thought, why not? Just give it a bash. And instead of doing a podcast, I thought I'll do it on YouTube instead, because I'm quite a visual person. So I tried to think I'm quite an ordinary person, but quite visual. So I try and think about what I would like to see or hear in a story. So I did a wee story on YouTube around about the Christmas of that year. It got a few views, like a handful of views, and I think most of them were my mum. And then I thought I'll give it another bash. I had some lovely comments from some of the people who'd seen it. And I did another video about Buckingham Terrace, and it followed the same kind of pattern. I got a few views, and then it just seemed to take off overnight. And I think I got 1,000 views in a night, which was huge for what I had previously. So I really enjoyed the creative process of it. It's a lot of work. for about every minute of video that people watch, there's about an hour of work that goes into it beforehand. So the last episode is 30 minutes, so that's about 30 hours of work. So it takes a lot of time, but it's a lot of fun. I love the researching part of it and learning the stories myself. And I just kind of thought, let's give it a crack, and then carried on with it. And I think I'm about 70-ish episodes in now. 3 books, lots of podcasts and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has really taken off, and the popularity of of Eerie Edinburgh is just kind of grown and grown. This is kind of a really tricky question, I suppose, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But for anybody who's whether they're from the US or from anywhere else in the world, and they kind of they think they know what Edinburgh is like, or anybody who's been in the UK and they just haven't ever been, like me, how would you describe Edinburgh to somebody who's thinking of going but never actually been to the city?
That's a good question. So Edinburgh is very small. You could walk from one side to the other probably in 3 or 4 hours. It's not a big city. It's got thousands of years of history. It's the Votadini tribe, the Celtic tribe, lived here about 3,000 years ago. The castle has had some kind of fortification on it for as long as humans have been here. If you go back a few hundred years, then we were surrounded by marshes and hills and lochs and things like that. So we had to restrict where Edinburgh was. And that's why the Old Town, as it's known, the Royal Mile is a straight line from the castle down to Holyrood Palace, with all these little closes that, like fish bones, that branch off. So we have had thousands of years worth of history. It's like layer upon layer upon layer being built up over time. And it's only in the 18th century that we started to expand, when engineering improved and we could drain the lochs and we could drain the marshes. So it's a very small city, big history, lots of stories, lots of interesting people, and lots of really interesting locations.
And like I said, just before we came on, I was talking briefly about how there are certain places in the UK, certainly in England, where it seems to be the place to go. It's like half a dozen places in England. Whether it's people talk about ghost stories, if it's 30 East Driving, it might be Chillingham Castle, it might be the Ram Inn, and it's kind of, and people kind of just talk about those few. Whereas the whole thing about Eerie Edinburgh, as you've said before, was actually to talk about lesser known locations. So, I mean, there are so many very famous places in Edinburgh, whether it's Greyfriars Cemetery, Mary King's Close, and things like that. And I don't want to kind of, I don't know whether to talk about those places because you do know the lesser known ones. But is there any particular place or story in Edinburgh do you think deserves more recognition and deserves to be kind of told a little bit more because it's just a better story than what may be well known?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. There's an area of the New Town, which is part of the expanded Edinburgh that was built in the 18th century. And you could draw a circle around 5 or 6 really strange ghost stories. There's Buckingham Terrace, there's Ann Street, there's Learmouth Gardens, which has got the haunted bum bone that was stolen from Egypt, which has always been a favourite of mine. There's the Learmouth Hotel. There's a few stories all in a really concentrated area. I've always been fascinated by that, and it's only a couple of miles along the road from where I live. But there's a story that I was contacted about last year by somebody who lived there in 2005, 2006 in Parliament Square. That was the first story that I've read in a long time that really got the chills up my back. It was such a creepy encounter, and one that I'd never heard of. So I'm literally the first person to bring this story, and it's the flat that the people lived in. They asked for anonymity, so I won't use their real names. It was a top floor flat, and it was used by the executioner If you don't know where Parliament Square is, it's just on the Royal Mile next to St Giles Kirk. It backs on to, or it's built, I believe, on some of the area that the Kirk used as a cemetery at one point. So it's typical. They've disturbed some sacred ground and strange things have happened. But it was also used at one point by the Edinburgh executioner. And we had the toll booth jail that stood right outside the flat. It's been knocked down a long time ago. But the person who the account happened to told me that they did a little bit of research for themselves, and what they discovered was that when the gallows were particularly busy, the executioner would use the property and they would hang people from within the building. I haven't been able to find that out myself, but I've got no reason to discount the story that I was told. For context, the woman who contacted me is a war photographer, and she lived opposite a BBC journalist who I also spoke to, and who corroborated a lot of the events that the main witness had told her. And some of the things that happened are straight out of like a Hollywood film. When they moved in, this happened to both women, so the BBC journalist and the war photographer. The first day that they moved in, they left the boxes packed and ready to be unpacked in the morning. And on each first night, they woke up to find that the boxes had been rearranged. The photographer, the boxes were blocking her exit from her bedroom door, and they had to get the fire brigade in to remove her because they'd been piled up from the door to the opposite wall. She had a flatmate, and she remembers being called into her flatmate's room, walking into the room and seeing her flatmate stuck in the bed with the bed sheets pulled down so tight that she couldn't move. And at the same time, there was a tennis ball stuck on the ceiling. And they would see I can only describe like a Dick Turpin type highwayman type character moving in and out the rooms, just catch a glimpse of him. But the thing that really got me was they had a small toilet, which would basically be a cupboard, but had been converted into a toilet. And sometimes they would see feet dangling through the ceiling as if it was somebody that was hanging from the rafters in the room above, but they were just swaying back and forward. There were a few other things that happened, like our flatmate had a bit of a bad time. She was found unconscious in the flat. She contacted somebody who, like psychics, wouldn't go into the property and things like that. It's an absolutely fascinating story. I did it for my Halloween special. It's the longest episode that I've done. It's like 50 minutes, but it's the story that people don't know about in Edinburgh that blows every other haunting in Edinburgh out the water, in my opinion.
I was gonna say I've never heard that. I've never had. I mean, there's a Phil in the chat who was there going, talk about Parliament Square, because he's obviously kind of followed it. And I mean, why do you think? I mean, do you think it was just purely because of anonymity purposes? People don't want to talk about these kinds of things. The reason why it's not so well known, or in terms of these things are going to be kind of found out and researched and kind of brought to the fore.
I think there's a lot of good storytellers just now who there's an element of trust with them, and from speaking to the main witness, what she kind of got across to me was that she trusts that I would tell the story in a way that would be respectful and not like tongue in cheek or cast doubt on their version of events. I've done a couple of other subscriber stories in the past, so I think she could see that this is how I do things. I think also that things like Uncanny are bringing stories back into the public opinion now, and people are really interested in stuff like that. We're kind of moving away from the ghost adventures. I'm not slagging off ghost adventures. There is a place for that. I do enjoy watching the odd episode, but I quite like the story aspect to it rather than the demonic, screaming and there's chaos happening. So I think there's more of a genuine interest in it, and people feel a little bit more comfortable in bringing their stories out because they're being treated seriously and are taken seriously and treated well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, I don't want to kind of talk about the main, most popular places, but out of the locations in Edinburgh that are well known, Mary King's Close, Niddry Street Vaults, Blair Street Vaults, Greyfriars Cemetery, the Mackenzie Poltergeist, all of that linked to the cemetery, and the Edinburgh Castle, of course. Is there any one place that you think actually has some, you know, a pretty good track records where it's kind of like commonly known that yes, it is still haunted, or do you think it's just a tourist trap, basically?
There's a couple of places that I know of that there's still events happening. So there's Chessel's Court. I did an episode on that, and the Lady in Black of Chessel's Court. And John Tintalon from North Edinburgh Nightmares I mentioned, he stayed there and he heard footsteps coming up to the property door. And each time they answered, there was nobody there. I don't think it was anybody playing Chapter Run. I think this was something unusual happening. And there's quite a famous account from that property from the 80s where something stopped a guy from getting out of bed. And this is a haunting that goes back probably 200 or 300 years. So there's continuous accounts happening there. And there's Learmonth Gardens, which is probably the haunting in Edinburgh that's traditionally has been taken the most seriously. It's one that Peter Underwood, you're probably aware of, the famous ghostwriter, he thought was proof of the existence of ghosts. Just a quick synopsis of that. I mentioned the haunted Bumbone. It was owned previously in the 1930s by the Seatons, Sir Alexander Seaton and his wife, whose name I forget, but begins with a Z. It's not Zendaya, but it's something like that. They went on honeymoon to Egypt, and because they were rich, they were given a guided tour of a newly discovered Pharaoh's tomb. And Sir Alexander's wife stole the sacrum from one of the mummies that was there. The sacrum is I think it's your tailbone, and she managed to smuggle it home to the property in Edinburgh, which was a huge mistake, as you can imagine. You don't steal from ancient Egypt. And all sorts of poltergeist activity happened there. The chimneys collapsed. They would leave the sacrum in a glass bowl in a room, and the rest of the room would get trashed, but the sacrum would be fine. People would see a strange figure dressed all in white climbing the stairs, which sounds kind of like, when you think about it's taken from Egypt, you're probably thinking this is a traditional mummy type thing. But that's always been viewed as a story that was legitimate. It made the press at the time. The Seatons ended up hating the amount of coverage that it got, but there's lots of witnesses. The property is now, as is the way with Edinburgh properties, it's now been split up into lots of different flats. I believe there's a Reiki office, not office, but studio in there, and the guy's on record as saying that, maybe not quite on record, but he's said that there are still things happening, dark shapes moving around the property and things like that. And interestingly, there's always a property for rent. Whenever I go past it, there's always somebody that's trying to rent that place out. So it seems like people won't stay in Learmonth Gardens.
It's only one thing I was kind of, obviously Edinburgh is kind of famously known for, like things like Burke and Hare and all of those kinds of things from the 1800s. Was it 1700s, 1800s? But do you think is there a particular period where these ghost stories have come from? Or is there a ghosts of, are they people typical Victorian dress, or does it, because of the history of Edinburgh, is there like a wider spread of ghost sightings from different eras, do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. It depends on the era that you'll get. The Newtown hauntings, that's the mid 1700s. So the ghosts appear from that period onwards. Along the Royal Mile, you'll find more of the Renaissance period, 16th, 17th century. Edinburgh Castle's got pipers, so that's probably 14th and 15th century. Holyrood Palace has Agnes, who is some sort of witch, I believe. If memory serves, it's a while since I've read this one. It might be dated back to the 15th century. So it's really dependent on where you are. The older places have the more traditional, like Lady in White or Lady in Black or Cavalier, or that kind of spirit, and the more modern places have more modern type hauntings.
The other thing as well I was thinking is that obviously you've got a lot of obviously historic buildings. You've got a lot of historic, streets and parks and places. And a little bit, we had Mackenzie on talking about York and saying, well, essentially York is basically one big cemetery. Do you get the same kind of feeling because of the layers of history of Edinburgh, that there are just certain areas of Edinburgh which are kind of more haunted, do you think, than others?
Yeah, Edinburgh is very similar. You know, I live in the Leith, and I'm about 100 feet from a cemetery, and there's another cemetery just over there. And I'm Leith traditionally has been a separate place from Edinburgh. That was only past 100 years or so that became part of Edinburgh. But Edinburgh itself, yeah, it's a giant cemetery, like outside St Giles. There is a now dug up graveyard that there's buildings built on top of. Greyfriars has hundreds of years. There's probably about 500,000 people buried there, and it's not the biggest graveyard in the world. So it's a raised graveyard. I think it depends on what you're looking for. You know, we mentioned the Newtown hauntings. There's a lot of in a very concentrated area, and if you look at the Royal Mile, I've got a map on the website, and I'm sure I remember there's at least 30 different stories that that I've added to the map just now. There's definitely more that I haven't included, and there's going to be more that are out there that I just don't know about. So, yeah, lots of places.
And is there, I mean, you talked about Parliament Square and things, but is there any kind of ghost stories that, or any, sightings that you've seen that you just think are great, whether it's because they're funny or unusual, because a lot of these places, these stories, they're kind of either linked to a pub or they're linked to a regular appearance of somebody appearing, or it could be a person walking by. But do you have like one which, you just like listening to because it's a great story?
There's a few like that, within Edinburgh. I love the Queensberry cannibal story. That's always stuck in my head ever since I first heard that, going back 35, 40 years probably. We've got vampires, we've got supposed werewolves, we've got so many different types of stories. But I think probably the one I would say is the Queensberry cannibal in Queensberry House on the Royal Mile.
Right, you've got to explain the Queensberry cannibal then.
Okay, so the Queensberry House is now part of the Scottish Parliament building. It's where I think the administrators work. But when it was not long after it was first built, it was home of the Marquess of Queensberry, who was one of the guys that really pushed for the signing of the Act of Union in 1707. So depending on which side of the political spectrum you were on, when that act was signed, you either rioted or you partied. And because he was somebody who pushed for it, he partied. And he took, again, it depends on the story. He either fled the property until the riots died down, because the Act of Union was very unpopular with the ordinary people in Scotland. It was the rich people, bought and sold for English gold kind of thing. So he either fled or he took his family to a lavish party, and he left the kitchen boy in charge of the house. But he didn't take all of his family with him. He left his son who was 10, who was mentally disabled. I can't think of the correct phrase, so apologies for that. But he had a disability, and he was quite violent. He didn't interact well with other children. He would always try and hit them and hurt them. So he basically was locked up on his own for the safety of other people. And it's the kind of traditional story, like the Monster of Glamis. He was fed through a hatch in the door. So the kitchen boy was left alone to look after the house. The kitchen boy was 12. But what they didn't realise was that they'd left the son's room door unlocked. So after a couple of days, once everything had died down, the family came back into the house, and they walked into an aroma of a meal being cooked. Somebody went into the kitchen to discover that the son had killed the kitchen boy and was roasting him on a spit in the kitchen. Now, I thought this was a legend, one of those stories, but it turns out it's true. The son was banished away from the house. He wasn't sent. He wasn't punished or anything. He was still given titles. He was sent to live in England. I think he died quite young, possibly around 16 or 18, something like that. I'm sure he died pretty young. But it's a real story, and it really happened. What I find fascinating is that the bar in Queensberry House now, that the staff use is where the kitchen is, and you can still see the archway for the fireplace that the kitchen boy was roasted by the Queensberry cannibal.
Jesus Christ!
Yeah, and
Oh my God,
there are
that's
stories.
grim.
The place is haunted after that now. There's the cries of a young boy, and there's dark shadows and things like that. But what really I find fascinating is Queensberry House has had dozens of different uses throughout its life. In the end of the 20th century, it was used as I believe, a care home for the elderly. And I remember reading somewhere that the nurses had reports that they would be pinned against the wall by dark shadows, black shapes, and would grab them around the throat. I can't find that anywhere, but I definitely read it somewhere that there was quite violent activity that was happening right up to the end of the 20th century. I'm sure something's still happening there now. It's not going to be spoken about because it's an official government building, but there's a lot of things have happened in that place.
Wow, that's a like some people say that's a hell of a story. Obviously, I talk about you've not just written about and talked about Edinburgh. You've talked about further afield. You've written a couple of books, one called Hidden Haunts England, one called Hidden Haunts Scotland, obviously. And for this evening, we're just going to focus on Scotland because I'm not that interested in England, to be honest. And obviously, you've done one called Ghostly Tales of the NC 500 as well, which is a route that people can drive literally around Scotland. Do you have, this is casting the net wider now. Do you have a favourite Scottish ghost story that may not necessarily be focused on Edinburgh?
Yeah, I think it's one that's quite close to home. And it's where my parents used to live, up on the shores of Loch Rannoch. They owned a farm up there in the mid-90s to the mid-noughties called Learan Farm. And if you don't know where Loch Rannoch is, it's in Perthshire. And if you look at a map of Scotland, it's almost slap bang in the middle of the country. And it's an amazing place. It's you can see the Munro Schiehallion from the farm. Schiehallion's got a lot of history associated with it. It's supposed to have fairy caves, a lot of folklore around it. Interestingly, it's the mountain that they managed to calculate the weight of the world from, and the first contour maps were drawn around Schiehallion. So loads of history there. My parents, the farm that they had was 200 plus acres, and it used to have, or it still has, ruins of old black houses, so like old crofts and things like that on it. The land that they had themselves had lots of history. Also has 3 ghost stories associated with it. So the first one, and this was one that my mum actually encountered something anyway, is the ghost light of Rannoch. So there's a forest across the water from them called the Black Forest, and the story is that this ghost light is probably more of a UFO if you think about it in modern terms, would hover over the trees and then make its way down and then hover in the middle of the loch, kind of reflecting off the water. And my mum, if you've ever been in Scotland away from the cities at night time, when it's dark, it's pitch black. You can't see more than a foot in front of you. So if there's a light anywhere, you'll see it. And my mum remembers getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. She walked past the hall and she looked out over the loch because it's a south-facing property that they had. And instead of seeing a ball of light sitting on top of the water was being illuminated from underneath, as if there was like a submarine or something under the water. But this is like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in Loch Rannoch, and I can't imagine there'd be many submersibles in Loch Rannoch. But she kind of did that typical older person thing. It just sort of went, I need the toilet, and then brushed it off, went to the bathroom, and then never thought about it, and then told me about it a few years afterwards. So that one's always fascinated me. But it also has a phantom coach associated with it. There was I think it was about a quarter of a mile driveway from the main road, which is a sea road effectively, up to the farmhouse. And the story would be that you would, I think when a death was near, a kind of portent of death, you would hear this coach come thundering up the driveway with these black horses leading it, and it was stopped right outside the farmhouse. But the one that I love, that's always really fascinated me, was the ghost stone. So the boundary of the property that they owned had, on the road, had this big stone, for want of a better word, just at the side of the road. Very nondescript stone, just it marked the end of the property. And in the 19th century, before cars, the postman would ride his horse round Lochrannoch and deliver post to all the different properties. And he approached Learn Farm, and when he got to the ghost stone, this white figure emerged from the stone, about 9 foot tall, something like that, big figure. And it made the horse rear, and the horse bolted, and he had to walk back to the next place to get a lift back to the post office. And from that moment on, his horse would never go past that stone. So he would have to go all the way to there and then go right back round to the other side to deliver the post to Rannoch. So I've always loved that story, mainly because, the stone is there, you can touch it, you can see it, you can imagine it, especially when it's dark or when the light's getting low, you can really picture this ghost coming out of the stone. It's a great story.
The thing is with Scotland, and like I said, I've been there a couple of times, and it's, like I said, I've never been to Edinburgh, which, like I said to you before I came on, I cannot believe I've never been to Edinburgh, but I haven't. But there's so many places in Scotland which are so atmospheric, whether it's castles and locks, and it's the sense of history, even, certainly with the clans and the battlefields and the sites. Is there a place like that, whether it's a castle or a battlefield, that you just think, wow, this is it has that sense of history, and it feels haunted? It feels like you can almost sense the ghosts of the past in these kind of places.
Yeah, there's lots of places, lots. So I do like to travel Scotland. I like to go camping. I like to go hill walking. So I've been to a good few places where I've felt this place is different. The one that springs to mind immediately is probably quite an obvious one, but it's Culloden battlefield. There are a good few stories associated with Culloden, and I don't know if that's just, I know the history of the place and the impact that it had on Scotland and how it shaped the culture and our national identity afterwards, or if it's, there is something that seeped into the moor there. Glencoe's another one. That's quite an eerie place. There's lots of castles. We've got the Glamis castles, but there's places like, we were talking before we went live about Kilhurn Castle. There's Ardvark Castle up the north coast that features in the NC 500 book. But there's places like Bannockburn House as well, which is only really in the last few years come onto the scene. That's near Stirling. And it was a place that kind of lay derelict for a long time. We're talking decades. And then it was bought out by some of the people who live local to the area, and they do a lot of fundraising stuff. It's got a lot of links to Bonnie Prince Charlie. There was an assassination attempt on him there, and they just found, they think, where the musket ball left the mark in the wall. But it's also really haunted. If you imagine a stately haunted home, you would picture Bannockburn House. It's a fascinating location. I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be given a guided tour by some of the volunteers there one October night. I didn't experience anything other than this just feels like a really, really creepy place. It's a really nice, good location for storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from what you're saying as well, I went to Culloden battlefield, and I cannot agree more. And this is from an English one who's just been there and kind of gets the sense of history there. It's palpable in that place. It really is. The one thing that I was going to sort of say is I've stopped over in a couple of places in Scotland, and one of those is the Drovers Inn, which is pretty well known, I would say, in terms of meant to be haunted, just north of Glasgow. But obviously, you've written about the tales of the NC 500, this kind of motorway route that people can take around Scotland. Is there anywhere you think that people should definitely stop off? Whether it's because there's a great ghost story there, or you just think, whether it's staying overnight in a hotel or a pub or somewhere that people should kind of check out for themselves, you think?
Yeah. Well, the whole thing, really. I'm a wee bit biased. I love the North Coast 500, but I think the northwest section of it, for me, is the part that's different. It feels like you've gone back in time. I rented a camper van when I did it in 2018, and it kind of felt like I'd rented a DeLorean rather than a camper van and travel back in time. You feel like you're going back a couple of hundred years. Not just because it's so remote and there's so little population there, but it just feels different. It feels like it's a slower way of life, and the atmosphere is different. There are places up there that are really, really strange. You've got Smoo Cave near Durness, which is a huge cave that's got a freshwater river flowing into it. There's a good story about a clansman who escaped from the devil in there, things like that. It's a wonderful location. And then just along in Durness, there's the story of the Durness Manse, where a priest was basically being haunted by like a banshee-like figure, maybe like a cognac, which is a Scottish equivalent. He would hear chaps on the door at night, and when he answered the door, there was nobody there, and he brought a friend over from another priest from a place called Kinlochbervie, and the priest from Kinlochbervie answered the door when the tapping happened, and there was an old craggy old man with sallow eyes, and when he answered the door, he kind of recognized this as like a cognac, like a banshee type character. So he fled, and he ended up dying shortly afterwards, and his wife died as well. So you're surrounded by this beauty. Durness has got some amazing beaches up there. Sango Sands, I think it's called. If it wasn't for the temperature of the water, you'd think you were in the Bahamas. But you also have this really dark legend and folklore side to it that's just incredible. If you go a little bit further along, you've got Sandwood Bay, which is quite a famous haunted place. So there's a bit of debate whether it was a hermit that lived there or whether it's an actual haunted place. So many places up there that are either for an ordinary tourist or for a paranormal tourist. You just have to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to open it up. So, for instance, I always do this, last 15 or so minutes of the chat. If you have got questions for Wayne, I know there's a couple of Scots in the chat as well who may have they may want to kind of quiz Wayne on some of these ghost stories around not just Edinburgh but around the Scotland. But start thinking of your questions for Wayne, please. Apparently, I'm out of sync. I don't know why. But anyway, apparently I am. Kaza as well. I didn't say thank you at the time. Well, I typed it, but thank you so much, Kaza, for your support, for the memberships. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the channel. Massive thanks to you. Thank you. Right. So just before we go on to people's questions, because have you got? I mean, I could quiz you all night, to be honest. I know there's loads that you could kind of just conjure from thin air. But do you want to give anybody just one other ghost story from anywhere in Scotland, anywhere you like, that's just you think might be good enough to kind of tell people before we get onto questions?
Yeah, I could tell you something that happened to me on the Isle of Gigha in 2006. It normally takes me about 10 minutes, so I'll try and do it a little bit quicker. But
that's fine.
In 2006, my son he was not long born. He was about 9 months old, and my ex-wife at the time was a budding photographer, and she was commissioned through a company that she worked for to take pictures of the Isle of Gigha, which had recently bought itself out from the ownership of the lairds using Islander money and I think National Lottery money. So the idea was that she would take pictures and they would use them on the website to help promote the island. And we were going to be put up for the weekend in a place called the Ferryman's Cottage. So we drove for about 5 hours because Edinburgh and Gigha is the other side of Scotland. It's off the coast of the Mull of Catire. My son just screamed the whole way. He was not a good traveller. He could not get him to sleep. And it was 5 hours of me just shut the boy up. And he just wouldn't stop. So it was quite a fraught journey to get there. And when we got there, the first thing that we did was kind of made some lunch so that Gabriel would eventually fall asleep. And plus we were starving. We'd been up since about 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'll give the layout of the cottage just so people can kind of build up a picture of it in their head. It's a typical one-story, 2-bedroom Scottish cottage. You walked in the front door and you had the kitchen on the right-hand side. It was quite a long, narrow kitchen, quite a dated kitchen. The whole property was quite dated. On the left was the living room that had a couple of couches and an armchair, if memory serves, and but straight ahead of you was the switchback staircase. And at the top of the staircase was the bathroom that had one of those old Victorian wooden or old style wooden doors with a frosted half glass on it. And then to the left was the main bedroom, and to the right was the spare bedroom that had one of these really creepy, big, heavy oak wooden Victorian style cots in it that I just imagined would start moving on its own, but never did. So we got fed. We had some soup. It was my job to do the washing up as Helena was feeding Gabriel and trying to get him to sleep, and I was, washing the pots. And there was a toaster just to the left, and I noticed that there was a very slight movement in the toaster, and I was kind of like, did I catch that? Did I imagine that? So I had a look around the toaster. I did notice that there was a lot of tension in the cable, and I was quite a messy dishwasher, so there was water on the counter. I thought it's probably tension in the cable. The water's got underneath it. It's just caused it to slide a wee bit. So I did my best to kind of put it out of my head. And I was, like I said, I was knackered, so I went up to try and have a nap. I love a nap. I still love a nap. I'm the best napper in the world, but I just could not get to sleep in this place. So I went up for about an hour. I did notice that Helen had come up to use the bathroom. I ended up going back downstairs, and Helena asked me what I was doing going through to the other bedroom. Now, I kind of clicked that something had happened at this point, and I immediately thought back to a time where Helena and I had been out for a walk in the forest, and it was dusk and it was getting really dark, and it was just simulacra. We saw what we thought were a pair of riding trousers from the waist down on the path in front of us, and she just freaked and she ran, which was the worst thing to do at a time like that, because then I ran and I just got absolutely freaked as well. So I immediately went back to that, and I was like, I have to not say anything here. So I kind of lied and said I was just checking on the cot to make sure it was all right for Gabriel again, but I hadn't moved. But I'll come back to this point later on. So over the course of that first day, it was a Friday, we independently of each other decided that we didn't want to sleep upstairs. We wanted to sleep in the living room, because that's where in our heads, that's where the television was. And we thought we'll just take the pillows off the couch and we'll make a bed, and it'll be comfy. Gabriel can sleep in the middle of us and we can just fall asleep watching the television. But we were like, we can't. Gabriel he's quite a quick learner, and he was crawling at that time, even though he was only 9 months old. So we had to create a barricade at the foot of the stairs so that he couldn't, in the middle of the night, crawl up the stairs and fall down the stairs. So we got like the coffee table. I took the parcel shelf out of the car, and I made this barricade with the spare pillows and things from the beds up the stairs. And you couldn't get past it. We had to move it all the time when we needed to use the bathroom, and whoever was in the bathroom, the other person had to stand at the bottom of the stairs and wait for them to come down, because although we didn't talk about it, we just felt creeped out by this place. So the Saturday came and went. We went out. She took her pictures. The weather was terrible. Typical Scottish summer weather on the west coast. It was dark. It was gloomy. It was perfect for photos for a ghost website, but not for a tourist website. And then the morning of the Sunday came, and we were packing up, getting ready to leave so that we could get the ferry. And we were pretty distracted, and obviously terrible parents, because it got to a point where we realised we hadn't seen Gabriel for a while, and we kind of panicked. So the first thing we did was we looked in the garden. It was a fenced-in garden, so he couldn't have gotten through the fence or through the hedges. He wasn't there. We looked obviously we were trying to avoid going up the stairs. We looked on the ground floor. We couldn't see anything. So he had to be up the stairs. And I have a memory of moving the barricade that I'd made to get up the stairs to go up and find them. And when I was walking up the stairs, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to walk in there and he's going to be floating, or he's going to have horns coming out his head, or he's going to be talking to somebody. He wasn't. He was just kind of playing away to himself in the middle of the floor. But I was like, right, I'm a bit freaked out. So I picked him up and went down the stairs and said to Helen, I think we need to double our efforts here. I think we should leave quite quickly. So we did. We packed up. We went into the car. And as soon as we got in the car, both of us were just like, I can't believe what that place was like. I hated it. It felt so bad. It felt so ominous. It just didn't feel right. And that's when Helena told me that the reason that she'd asked what I was doing when I tried to have a nap is because she'd seen somebody walk past the frosted glass from the room that I was in to the spare bedroom. But I have missed quite an important part, so I'll go back to the morning. So before we got into the car, before we kind of opened up to each other about what we'd seen, she had to take pictures of the ferryman's cottage. So she took maybe 4 or 5 different pictures from different angles, and it had a glass porch on the front. And in one of the pictures, you can see in the bathroom, there's a light in the room. It's not the bathroom light, but it's a light in the room that wasn't there when we were taking the pictures. But in the porch, in another couple of pictures, you can see what looks like the outline of a young boy looking round at us when we were taking the picture. The best way I can describe it is like when you drip oil in water and you get that rainbow iridescent effect. That was like an aura surrounding the outline of this boy. I don't know how I know it was a boy. It just looked like maybe a 13, 14-year-old boy. We discovered these when we got back home and uploaded the pictures to my computer. Now, this is 2006. This is before Facebook and Instagram and things like that. So everything was stored on that computer. And it was a computer that my mum had in the 90s and she'd given to me, and it packed in. I don't have the pictures anymore, but I have the memory of seeing this figure in the window. Now, Helena's family was originally from that area, and her auntie fancied herself as a bit of a historian, and she reckoned that there was somebody murdered in the ferryman's cottage in either the 50s or the 60s, which might explain some of the things that are happening there. I haven't been able to corroborate any of that. I've never found one article or news clipping that will back that up, but it does add that element of maybe that's why that place had that atmosphere, and it was very strange.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Have you been back since, or have you just
no? But
don't fancy it?
No, I'd love to go back. I genuinely would love to. I think it's an Airbnb now. It was part of there's a hotel on the island, and it was part of that. I think they now Airbnb it, so definitely like to go back, even just to visit Gigha again, because it was a lovely place.
Oh, fantastic. Right. On to kind of a few people's questions. Emma's just asking, have you got a favorite paranormal book or paranormal writer who has inspired your writing?
Well, I always loved Peter Underwood. I think his work, standalone, he's got so many good books with so many accounts. But I also quite like, this is probably quite controversial, I like Elliot O'Donnell. He was one of the first ghosts book writers, can't think of the correct term, authors who's written ghost books that I read, Scottish Ghost Tales, I think the book is called. I got it in Pitlochry in 1984 when I was just a kid, and it absolutely terrified but fascinated me. So I know there's a lot of question marks around the authenticity of the stories, but in terms of some of the stories that he's captured, Glamis Castle, places like that, I've always liked his stories.
You'll have to forgive me for any kind of mispronunciations here, because I had a Swedish guy in the other week, and I have the same kind of issues. I can't pronounce names for toffee. Bean's just asking, what do you think of Pool House? Now, is this Pool You?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it worth a visit? They have weekly paranormal tours. Is it haunted?
Yeah, so I believe I've written about Pool You in the North Coast 500 book. I'm sure Pool You features in there. There's over 50 stories, so forgive if my memory's not not that good. But that area, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a tourist, it's an absolutely beautiful area. If you're a paranormal tourist, then yes. I'm sure Pool You or the Kyle Skew and may have the ghost of a sailor in it. It's one of the two, but I've definitely written about Pool You. So yes, go to Pool You.
Fabulous. Simon, this is going to be another one. We have family in Leg, is it? And also Loch Gilphead. He says, are you aware of any spooky stories from either of those places?
Yeah, there's Loch Gilphead's not far from Gigha, where I stayed at the ferryman's cottage. I'm struggling to think of them off the top of my head, but there are definitely a lot of stories over there. There's a good few haunted castles out that way. I can't think of specific examples, but yes, there definitely are that I know of. Just they've escaped me just now.
Jem Treadwin is asking, any ghost stories associated with either, and I can't even say that, You can say that.
Inver
Or the
Raylort
Paramount
House?
Carlton Hotel. Is it Raylort? Inver Raylort House?
I don't actually know the name of that place. If you could tell me where it is, these places change names so regularly that I'd probably know it by a different name. The Carlton Hotel, I think, this is another one that's changed. I think is the hotel at the bottom of Lothian Road. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong with that. I don't know any stories associated with that. If that's the right place, then that used to be a train station, and it's only been a hotel for the past 100 years. So apologies, I don't know any stories associated with these two places.
That's okay. Sam Haynes is asking, what does Wayne think of the rise in people claiming some of the bothies around Scotland being haunted? I hadn't heard of them being haunted till recently.
Yeah, so I think it's probably Louis Belt and the Uncanny podcast that's kicked this off. There are a couple other ones that are quite famous for their hauntings. I think I sense a little bit of cynicism in the question. I echo some of that cynicism. I think they make great YouTube videos. You know, somebody's on their own in a bothy that's got no furniture. It's a sparse place in the middle of nowhere. What better location could you get for a video about this kind of thing? But I do know I'm trying to get some stories for a book about the West Highland Way, and there is a bothy off the shores of Loch Lomond that has accounts going back a few decades before YouTube, before the kind of paranormal tourism for this aspect came about. So there are definitely some stories associated with them. And if you think about the history of some of these places, you know, these were family homes where the families were kicked out to make way for sheep. There's going to be quite a lot of turmoil and upheaval with these places. So there are definitely some places that are haunted.
One here from Fell, he was the one that was talking about Parliament Square earlier. He says, hi Wayne, hope you're well. We spoke on X about the Parliament Square episode. Since that episode aired, have you had anyone else come forward with experiences from that location?
I haven't. And hello and thank you. But there are a few of us who you can rent the property. So I don't know about the rules of these places, so I won't mention the specific flat address, but it is an Airbnb. It's quite an expensive Airbnb given the location. I think it's about £800 for a couple of nights there. So there are a few of us who want to book this place out for a couple of nights, spread the cost and just experience it for ourselves. The witness has kind of kept an ear on the property, and it's similar to Learmonth Gardens. It's the kind of place that's either always up for sale or now that it's rented out, there's always people. They're always looking for people to move in. So it feels like there's still things happening there that just aren't being spoken about.
I'm going to ask this one. Beardo's a knob, but I'm going to ask Beardo's question, saying, what is your beard care routine? That is a majestic face rug. And he's saying, don't you skip it, Justin. They haven't.
Yeah, Beardo, that's a good question. I love your channel. Keep it up. I love what you do. I use oil, or I use the kind of waxy stuff, but a lot of snipping and a lot of trimming from time to time.
They are. See, I ask you a silly question, Beardo. Weird Fox Lou is saying, thanks for coming on, Wayne. Great stories. What about Nessie? You're always gonna get a Nessie question.
I would absolutely love Nessie to be true. I think there is something there. I don't think it's a plesiosaur or anything like that. I think it's going to be a big fish or a big eel that shouldn't be, we know about, but it shouldn't be in these waters. I think if you want a good loch monster story, you should look to Loch Morar, which is deeper, it's more remote, and there's less people that visit it, and there's better stories from there. But I would genuinely love for Nessie to be real. It's definitely something happening there. I don't quite think it's what people hope it is.
Yeah. Diane's asking, are there any hauntings associated with the alleged Scottish witches?
Yeah, there's lots and lots of hauntings. So there's the in Edinburgh, the first one that comes to mind is the Major Thomas Weir and his sister Griselle. They admitted Thomas Weir was like a captain of Edinburgh, a 17th century stalwart of the city. You know, he was on the city guard, and he held sermons in his house. He was a really upstanding citizen. And towards the end of his life, I think he was 70 or 71, he stood up in church and had admitted to all these terrible acts, being in league with the devil, getting a chariot that rode on flames to come and collect him and take him to Portobello, which is a place along the road. And his sister as well, she admitted to these stuff. They admitted to having relations with animals, with each other. Her ghost is said to haunt the Grass Market. Her face is seen in windows and she's in flames, which is how she was killed. She was burned at the stake, and he was, being a male, he was, I think he was strangled. Up in Dornoch, on the North Coast 500, there's a story about the last witch who was executed in Scotland, in Dornoch. Her ghost is said to roam the streets of Dornoch. There are more stories, but they're the ones that stick out.
Fantastic. Giuseppe is saying, I'm going to Kirkcudbright sometime soon. Is there any stories from there?
I don't know specifically for Kirkcudbright. I can't pronounce it now, even though
that's it. I said that completely wrong. Apologies.
Yeah, that's what's in my head.
Word.
Yeah, it's Kirkcudbright. I don't know any specific to there, but I know of some around that area. Yeah, and I can't think of them off the top of my head. Sorry.
Beardo saying, did I skip my beard question? No, I did not skip the beard question. You obviously weren't listening. Jesus. Go listen, pay attention. Right, I'm just going to go through if there's any other very, very last questions. Let's have a look. I think we're nearly done, to be honest, with the questions. So thank you so much for everybody for the questions. As ever, before, obviously, I always try to kind of ask this, and like I said, there are you've produced a number of books. So first of all, Ghostly Tales of the North Coast. Is it North Coast 500, NC 500? Hidden Haunts Scotland, Hidden Haunts England. Is there anything else that, obviously, before we wrap up and finish, that and obviously Eerie Edinburgh, the channel, but is there anything else that you're currently got in the works, or things that we should know about if they want to follow you and know more about what you do and what you've been talking about?
Yeah, I've been commissioned to write a third Hidden Haunts book, this time going across the water to Ireland, which is kind of new territory for me, which is great because I'm learning about these stories as I'm writing about them. So again, the whole point of the Hidden Haunts is to focus on the stories that people don't know about. And the only ones that I know of in Ireland are the traditional ones that, like most haunted, I've covered, like Lep Castle, the Hellfire Club, places like that. So
yeah,
I'm learning a lot about Ireland just now. It's absolutely fascinating. If anybody on the stream has any stories that they have from Ireland that would like to share, that they'd like to feature in the book, I know somebody on here has, and that's Emma from Ghost Catcher Isle. She's contributed to the Ireland book, her experiences there, and she also contributed to the England book for her experiences that her mum had in a care home that she worked in. Really, really scary stuff. But yeah, if anybody has any stories from Ireland that they'd like to contribute, please get in touch.
Fantastic. And obviously, for anybody who has not subscribed to Eerie Edinburgh, I don't know why you haven't, but follow them. Obviously, is in terms of on social media. Where else can they? Obviously, you got a YouTube channel, but where else can they kind of find you on social media?
Well, there's the EerieEdinburgh.com website. You can get me on Instagram, Eerie Edinburgh, Twitter, Blue Sky, places like that, Reels. Just look for Eerie Edinburgh and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Wayne, thank you. So I know this is, let's say, the first time I'd imagine probably first time you've come on camera, actually. But
yeah.
Thank you so much thank you so much for joining me. It has been just fantastic, because I said at the beginning I needed to kind of spend some more time kind of exploring some of the stories of Scotland, because they have such a history and such a beautiful place, and I absolutely have to come up to Edinburgh. I've got to do it. I cannot believe I've not been there yet. So it is on the cards.
Beardo needs to come too, and we can compare beards over a dram.
Oh Christ, yeah. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how messy that would get? Dear God. Anyway, Wayne, again, thank you so much. And like I said, by all means, come back whenever you want to on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I would love to.
Thank you so
much. And thank you,
much.
everyone, for the questions as well.
Thank you so much. Right. I'll just wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everybody who's joined us this evening. Just very briefly, I've got there's no Chimps Tea Party this Thursday. That'll happen next Thursday, which I'll talk about, which came second when I did the little poll. So we'll be talking about time slips. So week on Thursday. And next week, oh, well and good, I've got somebody who wants to tell us a bit about a personal witch. So it's not an expert or an author. I've had quite a few of those, but I'm going to be speaking to somebody who's had a personal experience with a poltergeist activity. So I'm going to be talking about her experiences. And your lip sync is all to part. Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what is going on with the lip sync thing. I think I need to get a fiber broadband, because obviously the internet's just not quick enough. But hopefully that'll all get sorted very soon. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to Kaza for the donations to the mods and generally for the channel. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody watching. Please, if you've enjoyed this evening, give it a thumbs up, give it a like, leave a comment, as long as it's a nice comment. Thank you very much. Leave a comment, leave a like, and share this around if you've enjoyed it this evening. So thank you to everybody watching. Anyway, I shall see you on next Monday for another podcast. And until then, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you again soon. All right, guys. Night.